When a violent storm tears apart a pirate ship off the coast of a forgotten village, most survivors never make it to shore. But one man does. Bloodied and broken, he washes up near the shack of Elena, a poor woman who has nothing but still chooses to help. While her neighbors cower behind locked doors, she tends his wounds and shares her meager soup. She expects no reward for her kindness. But when dawn breaks the next morning, Elena steps outside to discover something impossible. 1,000 black sails fill the horizon. An entire pirate armada has come for the man she saved. But will this legendary act of gratitude bring her fortune or destruction? Artifact. Captain's ring. A heavy gold signet bearing an intricate octopus design, the only clue to the wounded man's true identity. The storm had raged for 3 days and 3 nights, battering the small coastal village of Salmir with winds that howled like banshees and waves that crashed against the rocky shore with the fury of angry gods. Elena Vasquez had weathered many storms in her 43 years, but this one felt different, darker, more violent, as if the sea itself was at war with the land. When dawn finally broke on the 4th day, an eerie calm settled over the battered coastline. Elena emerged from her weathered shack, stepping carefully over debris scattered by the tempest. Broken fishing nets, splintered wood from destroyed boats, and tangled seaweed covered the shore like the remnants of some great maritime battle. That's when she saw him. A man lay motionless among the rocks, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, dark hair matted with blood and sand. His clothes, what remained of them, were unlike anything Elena had seen before. Rich fabrics, now torn and salt-stained, suggested wealth and status far beyond anything found in their humble village. Elena's first instinct was to call for help, but something made her hesitate. The man's chest rose and fell with labored breathing. He was alive, but barely. Blood seeped from a deep gash across his forehead, and his left arm bent at a sickening angle that spoke of broken bones. As she knelt beside him, checking for signs of life, her eyes fell upon his right hand. Despite the battering he'd endured, a ring remained firmly fixed to his finger, a massive gold signet that caught the morning light like a captured star. The design was intricate beyond anything a village blacksmith could create. An octopus with 8 perfectly detailed tentacles, each curling around symbols she didn't recognize. The ring was worth more than Elena had ever owned in her entire life, more than her shack, her few possessions, and every coin she'd managed to save combined. Yet it was not greed that made her heart race as she studied the mysterious jewelry. It was fear. Elena had heard the stories. Every coastal dweller knew the tales of pirates who sailed under the sign of the octopus, men who showed no mercy to those who crossed their path. The Crimson Brotherhood, they called themselves, and their reputation for violence preceded them like a dark cloud across the waters. But as she looked down at the unconscious man, Elena saw not a fearsome pirate, but a human being in desperate need of help. His face, peaceful in unconsciousness, showed no signs of the cruelty she'd been taught to expect from seafaring criminals. Instead, she noticed worry lines around his eyes, suggesting a man who carried heavy burdens, and scars that spoke of old wounds and hard-lived years. Behind her, Elena heard the voices of her neighbors beginning to emerge from their own homes, assessing the storm's damage. She knew that if they saw the ring, if they recognized its significance, they would either kill the man where he lay or turn him over to the authorities. Either fate would likely mean his death. In that moment, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She carefully worked the ring from the unconscious man's finger, her rough fisherman's daughter, hands gentle despite their calluses. The ring was even heavier than it looked, solid gold worked by master craftsmen. She tucked it safely into her apron pocket, then began the difficult task of dragging the wounded stranger toward her humble home. The man was larger than he'd appeared lying among the rocks, broad-shouldered and tall, with muscles that spoke of a life spent handling ropes and sails. Elena struggled with his weight, her small frame straining as she pulled him across the sand and up the path to her shack. Once inside, she laid him on her only bed, a simple straw mattress that had belonged to her mother. Elena had little in the way of medical supplies, but she'd tended enough injured fishermen to know the basics of wound care. She cleaned his cuts with precious fresh water, bound his broken arm with strips torn from her best dress, and spooned thin broth between his cracked lips. Throughout the day, as she worked to save a stranger's life, Elena found herself repeatedly drawn to the ring now hidden in her pocket. Each time she touched it, she wondered who this man truly was, what storms, both literal and metaphorical, had brought him to her shore, and what consequences her decision to help him might bring. As evening fell, the stranger stirred for the first time, his eyes fluttering open to reveal depths as dark and mysterious as the ocean itself. In those brief moments of consciousness, he whispered a single word that made Elena's blood run cold. Brotherhood. Artifact. The parish bell. An ancient bronze bell that hasn't rung in decades, suddenly tolling at dawn as the armada appears. Word travelled fast in a village as small as Salmir. By the time Elena had finished tending to the stranger's wounds, half the village knew about the mysterious man she'd pulled from the storm-ravaged shore. By evening, whispered conversations filled every doorway and gathered crowd. Thomas Blackwood, the village elder whose family had lived in Salmir for 7 generations, was the first to confront Elena directly. He arrived at her door just as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, his weathered face creased with worry and determination. "Elena, child," he said, his voice carrying the authority of his 78 years, "you need to reconsider what you're doing. That man you've taken in, he's not what he seems." Elena stood firm in her doorway, blocking Thomas's view into her humble home, where the stranger lay unconscious. "He's injured and needs help. That's all I need to know." "Is it?" Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Miguel Santos saw you dragging him up from the shore. Said the man had tattoos across his arms, the kind sailors get, but darker, rougher, the kind pirates mark themselves with." Behind Thomas, Elena could see other villagers gathering in small groups, their faces reflecting the fear that had taken hold of the community. Maria Gonzalez clutched her rosary beads while staring at Elena's shack as if it might explode at any moment. The fishermen who'd returned from assessing their storm-damaged boats whispered among themselves, occasionally pointing toward Elena's home. "Even if he is a pirate," Elena said quietly, "he's unconscious and badly hurt. What threat could he possibly pose?" "You don't understand," Thomas pressed, stepping closer. 20 years ago, pirates raided the village of San Marcos, just 50 miles up the coast. They burned half the town, killed anyone who resisted, and took what they pleased. The survivors said they came without warning, like wolves descending on sheep. Elena had heard the stories of San Marcos, but they'd always seemed like distant nightmares, cautionary tales told to children to make them appreciate the safety of their own homes. Now, with an unconscious stranger lying in her bed, those tales felt uncomfortably real. "This man is half dead," she insisted. "He couldn't harm a butterfly in his condition." "But what happens when he recovers?" asked Father Miguel, the village priest, who had joined the growing crowd. His usually gentle voice carried unusual urgency. "What happens when his crew comes looking for him?" Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. The priest's words echoed her own fears she'd been trying to suppress since finding the mysterious ring. Pirates rarely traveled alone, and if this man was truly part of a crew, they would eventually come searching for him. "Look at what he did to you already," said Carmen Ruiz, pointing at Elena's torn dress. "Your best dress, ripped to shreds for bandages. What else will you sacrifice for a stranger who'd probably slit your throat the moment he's strong enough?" "I tore my own dress to save a man's life," Elena replied firmly, "and I'd do it again." The crowd's murmur grew more agitated. Elena could see fear transforming into anger on many faces, the kind of anger that made desperate people do desperate things. She recognized the dangerous moment when a group of individuals becomes a mob, unified by shared fear and looking for simple solutions to complex problems. "Listen to reason, Elena," Thomas said, his voice taking on the tone he'd once used as the village's unofficial magistrate. "Turn him over to us. We'll take him to the provincial authorities in the morning. Let them decide what to do with him." Elena knew what the authorities would do. A man found unconscious on the beach with suspicious tattoos and expensive clothing would be either imprisoned indefinitely or executed as a pirate without trial. Either fate seemed cruel for someone who hadn't even regained consciousness to defend himself. "No," she said simply, "I won't turn away someone who needs help, regardless of what he might have done before he washed up on our shore." The crowd's reaction was immediate and hostile. Voices rose in protest, calling Elena foolish, selfish, and dangerous. Some demanded she be forced to give up the stranger for the village's safety. Others suggested burning her shack with the pirate still inside. Above the growing cacophony of angry voices, a sound cut through the evening air that made everyone freeze: the deep, resonant toll of the parish bell. The ancient bronze bell that had been silent for decades suddenly rang out across the village, its mournful tone carrying an ominous warning that seemed to come from the very soul of the sea itself. As the bell's echo faded into the gathering darkness, every face turned toward the harbor, where strange lights flickered on the horizon like fallen stars rising from the depths. Artifact, the leather journal, a water-damaged diary containing navigation charts and coded messages revealing the stranger's identity as Marcus Shadowbane draked the mysterious lights on the horizon, had vanished by morning, leaving the villagers to wonder if they'd imagined the strange phenomenon. But Elena had no time for such speculation. Her patient had developed a fever during the night, and his delirious mumblings filled her small shack with fragmented words that made little sense. "Isabella, betrayed, 10 years, he whispered, his head thrashing on the pillow. "Must find, brotherhood." Elena bathed his burning forehead with cool water, trying to comfort him even as his words sent chills down her spine. The ring hidden in her apron seemed to grow heavier with each fevered utterance, and she found herself studying the man's face more carefully, searching for clues about his true identity. When she'd first found him, survival had been her only concern. Now, with time to observe him properly, Elena noticed details that troubled her. Scars crisscrossed his hands and forearms, not the random marks of accident or misfortune, but the deliberate patterns of someone who'd lived by violence. His muscles, even in unconsciousness, retained the coiled tension of a man always ready for battle. As she changed the water in her basin, Elena noticed something she'd missed the night before: a leather satchel so water-damaged and covered in sand that it had blended perfectly with the debris on the shore. The bag must have washed up with the stranger, overlooked in her haste to get him to safety. The leather was high quality, or had been before the storm. Now it was swollen and discolored, its brass buckles green with corrosion. Elena hesitated before opening it, knowing that whatever lay inside would likely confirm her worst fears about her mysterious guest. The satchel contained 3 items: a small pouch of coins that had somehow survived the salt water, a compass whose needles spun wildly as if confused by proximity to something magnetic, and a thick journal wrapped in oiled cloth that had protected it from the worst of the water damage. Elena's hands trembled as she unwrapped the journal. The leather cover bore the same octopus design as the ring, but smaller and more discreetly placed. Someone had carved the symbol into the leather with obvious skill, suggesting it held personal significance rather than mere decoration. Opening the journal felt like violating the stranger's privacy, but Elena reasoned that understanding his identity might be crucial to protecting both him and her village. The first few pages were filled with what appeared to be navigation notes: distances between ports, descriptions of coastal landmarks, and detailed maps of islands she'd never heard of. But as she turned deeper into the journal, the entries became more personal and infinitely more disturbing. The handwriting was educated and precise, suggesting a man of intelligence and learning, but the content revealed a life lived outside the boundaries of civilized society. "Third successful raid this month," read one entry dated 2 years earlier. "The merchant vessel surrendered without a fight once they saw our colors. Divided the cargo according to the code. Each man received his fair share, with extra portions for those wounded in the previous engagement." Elena's heart sank as she read page after page detailing raids, battles, and the complex politics of pirate society. But gradually, she began to notice a change in tone. Earlier entries spoke of violence and conquest with matter-of-fact casualness, but later passages revealed growing doubt and introspection. 10 years since the Brotherhood cast me out. Read an entry from just 6 months ago. 10 years since Isabella's betrayal cost me everything I'd built. I've tried to find redemption in isolation, but the sins of my past follow like shadows. Perhaps a man can never truly escape what he's done. The name leaped from the page like a physical blow, Marcus Drake. But it was the notation in the margin that made Elena's blood freeze. Shadowbane, the name they gave me when Mercy died. Elena had heard that name whispered in taverns and repeated in the cautionary tales that sailors told to impress landlubbers. Marcus Shadowbane Drake, the pirate captain who'd terrorized shipping lanes for 15 years before vanishing mysteriously from the seas. The man whose very name could silence a room full of hardened fishermen. Yet as she continued reading, Elena discovered something unexpected: remorse. The later entries revealed a man tormented by his past, desperately seeking some path toward redemption that seemed forever beyond his reach. His exile from the Crimson Brotherhood hadn't been punishment. It had been the catalyst for a transformation that was still incomplete. The final entry, dated just days before the storm, contained a single line that changed everything Elena thought she knew about a dangerous guest. "If I cannot undo my sins, perhaps I can spend what remains of my life preventing others from following the same dark path." Artifact, the compass rose pendant, a silver navigational charm that Marcus gives Elena as a token of protection and gratitude. The fever broke on the 3rd day, just as Elena was beginning to fear she might lose her mysterious patient. Marcus Drake's eyes opened slowly, focusing with difficulty on the rough wooden ceiling of her shack before turning to study the woman who sat beside his makeshift bed. "You're awake," Elena said softly, setting aside the journal she'd been reading. She'd spent hours poring over his entries, trying to reconcile the violent past they described with the vulnerable man lying before her. Marcus attempted to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his broken arm and bruised ribs. Elena gently pressed him back against the pillow, her touch surprisingly firm for such a small woman. "Don't try to move yet," she said. "You've been unconscious for 3 days. Your arm is broken, and you have a serious head injury." For a moment, Marcus simply stared at her, as if trying to process not just her words, but the very fact of her presence. His dark eyes, which Elena had expected to be cold and threatening, instead showed confusion mixed with something that looked remarkably like wonder. "You helped me," he said, his voice rough from disuse. It wasn't a question, but a statement of such profound surprise that Elena almost smiled. "Of course I helped you. You were dying. But you don't know who I am." Elena hesitated, glancing at the journal that lay open beside her chair. "Actually, I do know. I found your journal. I know you're Marcus Drake." Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, Elena saw resignation rather than anger. "Then you know what I've done, the lives I've taken, the ships I've plundered." He looked around her humble shack, taking in the simple furniture and obvious poverty. "You know I've destroyed the lives of people just like you, and yet you saved me anyway. Why?" Elena had been asking herself the same question for 3 days. The logical answer was that she'd acted before knowing his identity, but that wasn't entirely true. Even after discovering who he was, she'd continued caring for him, protecting him from the village's growing suspicions. "Because," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "the man I found on the beach wasn't the same man who wrote those early journal entries. People can change, Mr. Drake. Your own words prove that." Marcus studied her face, searching for signs of deception or hidden motives. In his experience, kindness always came with a price, and mercy was usually a luxury that people couldn't afford. Yet this woman, who possessed nothing of material value, had risked everything to help a stranger. "You read about Isabella's betrayal," he said, "about how the Brotherhood cast me out. I did. But I also read about your regret, about your desire to find redemption." Elena leaned forward, her voice becoming more intense. A truly evil man doesn't torture himself with guilt over his past actions. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands as if seeing them clearly for the first time in years. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that spoke of genuine transformation. 10 years ago, I was the most feared captain on these seas. My crew followed me not out of loyalty but out of terror. I believed that strength meant crushing anyone who stood in my way, that mercy was weakness that would get me killed. He looked up at Elena. Isabella Santos, my first mate, challenged that philosophy. She believed there was a difference between being strong and being cruel. What happened between you? I ordered the execution of prisoners who had surrendered. Isabella refused to carry out the command. She said we were supposed to be pirates, not monsters. Marcus's jaw tightened. I had her flogged for insubordination. The crew never forgave me for that. Within a month, they'd elected her as their new captain and voted me into exile. Elena felt a chill as she imagined the man Marcus had once been. Cold, ruthless, quick to violence. Yet the man lying in her bed seemed incapable of such cruelty. The transformation described in his journal hadn't been mere words, it had been a fundamental change in his very nature. That exile saved your soul, Elena said quietly. Being cast out forced you to confront who you really were beneath all that anger and violence. Marcus reached into the small pile of belongings Elena had salvaged from the beach, withdrawing a silver pendant she hadn't noticed before. It was beautifully crafted in the shape of a compass rose, with 8 points representing the cardinal and ordinal directions. The silver caught the lamplight and seemed to glow with inner warmth. This belonged to my mother, he said, offering it to Elena. It's the only honest thing I own. Everything else was taken by force or bought with stolen gold. I want you to have it. Elena shook her head. I can't accept something so precious. Please. Marcus's voice carried an urgency she hadn't heard before. Where I come from, a debt of honor must be acknowledged. You saved my life, and more than that, you showed me that mercy still exists in this world. The pendant will protect you when my past catches up with us. Reluctantly, Elena accepted the pendant, feeling its weight in her palm. The silver was warm, as if it had absorbed something essential from the years Marcus had carried it. Your past is already catching up, she said, thinking of the strange lights the villagers had seen on the horizon. The question is whether you're ready to face it as the man you've become, rather than the man you used to be. Artifact. The signal mirror. A polished bronze mirror used to send coded light signals across vast ocean distances. Marcus had been awake for only a few hours when the first official arrived at Elena's door. Lieutenant Rodriguez of the Provincial Guard stood stiffly in the morning sunlight, his uniform freshly pressed despite the long ride from the regional capital. Behind him waited 4 soldiers, their hands resting casually on their sword hilts. "Señorita Vasquez," Rodriguez said formally, touching his cap. "I've received reports that you're harboring a dangerous individual. I'm here to investigate these claims." Elena stepped outside, carefully closing the door behind her. Through the thin walls, she knew Marcus could hear every word of the conversation that would determine both their fates. "I'm caring for an injured man who washed ashore after the storm," she replied calmly. "Nothing more." Rodriguez consulted a folded paper from his coat pocket. The description matches that of Marcus Drake, known as Shadowbane, wanted for piracy, murder, and crimes against the crown. If you're sheltering this man, you're committing treason. Elena felt the compass rose pendant beneath her shirt, its silver warmth reminding her of Marcus's transformation and the courage required to help someone society had condemned. "I'm helping a man who nearly died. If that's treason, then I'm proud to be a traitor." The lieutenant's expression hardened. "Stand aside, señorita. We'll search the premises." "You have no legal authority here without a proper warrant," Elena said, surprising herself with her boldness, "and you have no proof that my patient is the man you're seeking." Rodriguez stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I don't need proof to arrest you for obstruction of justice. Now stand aside, or I'll have you bound and taken to the capital for questioning." Inside the shack, Marcus heard every word of the exchange. His broken arm made movement difficult, but he managed to reach his salvaged belongings and withdraw a circular bronze mirror polished to a perfect reflective surface. The mirror was no larger than his palm, but in the hands of someone who understood maritime signaling, it could communicate across vast distances. Through a crack in the wooden wall, Marcus could see the ocean stretching toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, he knew, ships of the Crimson Brotherhood were searching for him. Isabella Santos had never stopped looking for her former captain, driven by guilt over the circumstances of his exile and loyalty that transcended their political differences. Elena's voice carried clearly through the walls as she continued to defy the authorities. "This man has committed no crimes while under my care. He's unconscious and badly injured. What threat could he possibly pose?" "The threat isn't what he might do now," Rodriguez replied coldly. "It's what he's done before, and what his allies might do if they discover his location." Marcus angled the mirror carefully, catching the morning sunlight and directing it toward the open sea. The light flashed once, twice, 3 times, a pattern that had meaning only to those who understood the Brotherhood's signaling codes. He was identifying himself, broadcasting his location, and requesting immediate assistance. But even as he sent the signals, Marcus felt torn between hope and dread. Summoning the Brotherhood would save Elena from the immediate threat posed by the Provincial Guard, but it would also bring 1,000 pirates to her peaceful village. The cure might prove far more dangerous than the disease. Outside, the confrontation was escalating. Rodriguez had grown tired of Elena's resistance and gestured to his men. "Search the building. If you find the pirate, arrest him. If the woman interferes, arrest her too." Elena stepped directly in front of her door, arms spread wide to block their passage. "I won't let you harm an innocent man." "Innocent?" Rodriguez laughed harshly. "Marcus Drake has more blood on his hands than most armies. He's destroyed entire merchant fleets and killed anyone who stood in his way." "People change," Elena said firmly. "Redemption is possible for anyone willing to seek it." "Pretty words, señorita, but the dead don't care about redemption." As the soldiers moved toward Elena's shack, Marcus continued flashing signals across the water. His messages were specific now, not just a call for help, but detailed instructions. He was telling Isabella to come quickly but carefully, to approach with overwhelming force that would discourage resistance, rather than provoke a bloody battle. The bronze mirror grew warm in his hands as he worked, the polished surface reflecting not just sunlight, but the weight of decisions that could affect hundreds of lives. Every flash carried across the waves carried both hope and danger, salvation and potential destruction. Through the wall, Marcus heard the sound of struggle as Elena physically resisted the soldiers' attempts to enter her home. Her courage in defending him, despite knowing his violent past, represented everything he'd learned about true strength during his years of exile. One final signal flashed across the water, a personal message meant only for Isabella Santos, wherever she might be. It was a simple acknowledgement of the debt he owed her, and a promise that he would face whatever consequences awaited with the dignity she had once tried to teach him. As footsteps approached the door of the shack, Marcus tucked the mirror away and prepared to surrender himself to protect Elena from further harm. But the horizon remained empty, and he could only hope that somewhere beyond the curve of the earth, old loyalties were stirring in response to his desperate call for help. Artifact, the Blood Oath Scroll, an ancient parchment bearing the signatures of 1,000 pirates, swearing eternal loyalty to their captain 50 miles from shore. The flagship Crimson Vengeance cut through ocean swells with the grace of a predator sensing prey. On her quarterdeck, Captain Isabella Santos studied the horizon through her spyglass, watching for the light signals that would tell her whether Marcus Drake still lived. Isabella had changed significantly in the 10 years since Marcus's exile. Where once she had been his passionate and idealistic first mate, challenging his brutal methods with fiery arguments, she now commanded the largest pirate fleet in the Caribbean with cold efficiency. The crew respected her not just for her tactical brilliance, but for the unwavering code of honor she had established after taking command. "Captain," called her lookout from the crow's nest, "signals from shore." 3 flashes, pause, 3 flashes, it's the captain's code. Isabella felt her heart skip, though her expression remained impassive. For 10 years she had searched for Marcus Drake, driven by guilt over the circumstances of his exile and the knowledge that her challenge to his authority had ultimately destroyed him. She had told herself it was about honor and completing unfinished business. But deep down she knew it was about redemption, both his and her own. "What's the message?" she called back. "Assistance requested. Provincial guard in pursuit. Civilian protection priority." Isabella smiled grimly. Even after a decade of exile, Marcus was thinking about protecting innocents rather than saving his own skin. The transformation she had hoped to inspire through rebellion had apparently taken root during his years of solitude. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Full assembly. We sail for shore immediately." As signal flags spread the word from ship to ship, Isabella retreated to her cabin to consult the most sacred document in pirate lore. The Blood Oath scroll lay secured in an iron strongbox, protected by 3 separate locks and wrapped in silk that had once belonged to the legendary pirate King Henry Morgan himself. Below the oath, arranged in careful columns, were the signatures of over 1,000 pirates who had served under Marcus Drake during his 15 years as captain. Some names were written in educated script, others scratched out in rough letters by men who had barely learned to write. But each signature represented a solemn vow, sealed with a drop of the signer's blood. Isabella's own signature appeared prominently in the first column, a reminder of the day she had joined Marcus's crew as a 17-year-old girl fleeing an arranged marriage. Next to it was the signature of Thomas Blackheart Morrison, who had been Marcus's gunner until jealousy and ambition had driven him to challenge the captain's authority in increasingly dangerous ways. As Isabella studied the scroll, she remembered the ceremony where each pirate had sworn their oath. Marcus had required every crew member to understand exactly what they were pledging, not blind obedience, but loyalty to the principles of brotherhood, fair treatment, and shared sacrifice. The oath was meant to create something more honorable than the typical pirate crew, a family bound by choice rather than fear. "The blood oath binds us all," Isabella murmured, tracing her finger along the ancient words. "Through storm and battle, through triumph and defeat, we stand together as one." The irony wasn't lost on her that this same oath had ultimately led to Marcus's downfall. When she had challenged his increasingly brutal methods, she had invoked the Brotherhood's code of honor. When the crew had voted him into exile, they had cited the same principles of justice that the oath was meant to uphold. But the oath also demanded that they answer his call for help, regardless of past grievances. A captain who had been exiled could still claim the protection of his former crew if his life was in danger. The blood that sealed their signatures created bonds stronger than personal anger or political disagreement. Isabella rolled up the scroll and secured it in its strongbox, then climbed back to the quarterdeck where her officers waited for orders. Around them, the Brotherhood fleet stretched across the horizon, 147 ships of various sizes, from massive galleons to swift sloops, all flying the crimson flag with its distinctive octopus emblem. "What are your orders, Captain?" asked her first mate, a scarred veteran named Rodriguez, who had served with distinction under both Marcus and Isabella. "We honor the blood oath," Isabella replied, her voice carrying across the deck with absolute authority. "Marcus Drake saved my life when I was nothing but a frightened girl with nowhere else to turn. He taught me that strength without honor is merely brutality, and that true leadership means protecting those who cannot protect themselves." She turned to address the entire crew, her voice growing stronger with each word. 10 years ago, we exiled our captain because his methods had become too cruel, too divorced from the principles we swore to uphold. But exile was meant to teach, not to destroy. If Marcus has learned the lessons that exile was meant to impart, then our duty is clear. The crew cheered, their voices carrying across the water to the other ships of the fleet. The Blood Oath scroll might be hidden away in Isabella's cabin, but its spirit lived in every man and woman who sailed under the Brotherhood's colors. "Signal all ships," Isabella commanded. "We sail to restore our captain. not to the man he was, but to the man he was meant to become. Artifact, her mother's locket, a simple silver pendant containing a pressed flower representing Elena's connection to family and tradition. The provincial guard soldiers pushed past Elena with practiced efficiency, their heavy boots echoing through her small shack as they searched for the notorious pirate they were certain lay hidden within. Elena stood in her doorway, heart-pounding, watching as strangers violated the sanctuary she had created for a man who had nowhere else to turn. "There's no one here," announced Sergeant Martinez after checking behind the simple wooden furniture and beneath the straw mattress. "Just an empty bed and some blood-stained rags." Elena's confusion was genuine. Marcus had indeed vanished, though she had no idea how or when. The window facing the ocean stood slightly ajar, suggesting he might have slipped away during the night, rather than allow her to face consequences for helping him. Lieutenant Rodriguez studied Elena's face carefully, searching for signs of deception. "Where is he, señorita? We know you've been harboring a wanted criminal." "I don't know where he is," Elena replied honestly. "I found an injured man on the beach and tried to help him, that's all." As the soldiers continued their fruitless search, Elena's hand moved unconsciously to the small silver locket that hung around her neck, her most precious possession and the only inheritance from her mother, Maria Vasquez. The locket was simple, unadorned silver that had tarnished with age, but inside lay a pressed flower that her mother had picked on the day Elena was born. Maria had been a woman of deep faith and even deeper compassion, known throughout Salmir for taking in stray animals and helping anyone who knocked on her door. She had raised Elena alone after her father died in a fishing accident, instilling in her daughter the belief that kindness was never wasted, even when it seemed futile or dangerous. "Your mother would be ashamed," Rodriguez said cruelly, apparently recognizing the locket's significance. A good Catholic woman who raised her daughter to aid criminals and murderers. Elena's grip on the locket tightened. "My mother taught me that every person deserves dignity regardless of their past. She would have done exactly what I did." The memory of her mother's voice seemed to whisper through the years. "Mija, when you find someone who needs help, you don't ask what they've done, you ask what they need. God will sort out the rest." Maria Vasquez had lived by those words until her death 5 years earlier. During a cholera outbreak that killed dozens in the village, she had tended the sick without regard for her own safety, opening her home to anyone who needed care. She had died as she lived, helping others, even when it cost her everything. "You have one chance to redeem yourself," Rodriguez continued. "Tell us where the pirate went, and we'll consider your cooperation when determining charges." Elena looked around her humble shack, taking inventory of the life she had built in this small corner of the world. It wasn't much, a few pieces of furniture, some cooking utensils, a handful of books that had belonged to her mother. But it was hers, earned through years of taking in washing, mending nets, and doing whatever honest work she could find. All of that security could disappear with her next words. If she continued to protect Marcus, Rodriguez would likely arrest her as an accomplice. She would face trial in the regional capital, far from anyone who knew her character or could speak for her integrity. The shack would be confiscated, her few possessions sold to pay court costs. But as Elena fingered her mother's locket, she realized the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Her mother had raised her to believe that some things mattered more than personal safety or material comfort. Compassion wasn't conditional on convenient circumstances or guaranteed outcomes. It was a principle that defined who you were in the darkness when no one else was watching. "I told you the truth," Elena said firmly. "I found an injured man and helped him heal. When I woke this morning, he was gone. I don't know where he went, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Rodriguez's face flushed with anger. "You're making a serious mistake, señorita. Harboring a known pirate is a hanging offense. Then I suppose you'll have to hang me for showing mercy to someone who needed it." The words came out stronger than Elena felt, but once spoken, they seemed to create their own momentum. She thought of Marcus's journal entries, his obvious remorse for past actions, his desperate search for redemption. Whatever he had done before the storm brought him to her shore, The man she had nursed back to health was not the same person who had once terrorized merchant ships. Through her window, Elena noticed strange movement on the horizon, dark shapes that might have been storm clouds, or might have been something else entirely. The sight filled her with both hope and dread, suggesting that her choice to help a stranger might have consequences far beyond anything she had imagined. Rodriguez followed her gaze and frowned. "What are you looking at?" Elena smiled, her hand still clutching her mother's locket. "The future, Lieutenant. And I think it's going to be more complicated than any of us expected." Outside, the shapes on the horizon were growing larger, and Elena began to understand that her simple act of compassion was about to transform not just her own life, but the entire world she had always known. Artifact, the golden spyglass, Marcus's personal telescope, through which Elena first sees the approaching fleet and understands the magnitude of what her kindness has awakened. Elena woke before dawn to the sound of voices outside her shack. Not the angry murmurs of her neighbors or the official commands of Rodriguez's soldiers, but something else entirely. Hushed, reverent whispers that seemed to carry an almost religious awe. She stepped outside to find half the village standing on the beach, their faces turned toward the horizon where the first light of morning was beginning to paint the sky. Even Rodriguez and his soldiers had abandoned their search to stare seaward, their expressions shifting from confusion to growing alarm. "Santa Maria," whispered Father Miguel, making the sign of the cross. "What are we seeing?" Elena followed their collective gaze and felt her breath catch in her throat. The horizon was no longer empty ocean meeting sky. It was filled with shapes that seemed to emerge from the dawn itself like manifestations of some impossible dream. Ships, dozens of them. No, hundreds. "It has to be an illusion," muttered Thomas Blackwood, rubbing his eyes as if he could make the vision disappear through disbelief. Ships don't travel in such numbers. But the shapes grew clearer as the sun climbed higher, revealing details that made the impossible undeniably real. These weren't merchant vessels or naval patrol ships, they were pirates, flying colors that hadn't been seen together in living memory. Black sails, crimson flags, and the distinctive banners of crews that had never before sailed in formation. Elena remembered something Marcus had left behind during his mysterious departure, a spyglass of extraordinary craftsmanship, its brass fittings polished to golden brightness, and its lens so clear it seemed to capture light and magnify it beyond normal possibility. She retrieved it from her shack and raised it to her eye. Through the spyglass, the distant fleet became a breathtaking spectacle of maritime power. The lead ship was a massive galleon, her hull painted deep crimson, and her sails bearing the octopus emblem Elena now recognized from Marcus's ring and journal. Around her sailed vessels of every description, sleek sloops built for speed, heavy frigates bristling with cannons, and exotic craft from distant waters that Elena had only heard described in sailors' tales. "How many ships do you count?" asked Rodriguez, his official authority seeming suddenly insignificant in the face of this unprecedented display. Elena continued scanning the horizon through Marcus's spyglass, her amazement growing with each vessel she identified. 50, 70. More than I can count properly. They stretch beyond what I can see. The truth was even more staggering than her conservative estimate. Through the powerful lens, Elena could make out individual figures on the distant decks, men and women moving with the practiced efficiency of experienced sailors, preparing for what? Battle? Landing? She couldn't tell, but their coordination suggested careful planning rather than spontaneous assembly. On the flagship's quarterdeck, a figure in an elaborate hat was directing activities with gestures that spoke of absolute authority. Even at this distance, Elena could sense the power this person commanded, the ability to coordinate hundreds of ships and thousands of people in pursuit of a single goal. "They're coming for him," she whispered, lowering the spyglass. "They're coming for Marcus." Rodriguez spun to face her. "What do you know about this? Did you signal them somehow?" Elena shook her head, but even as she denied involvement, she began to understand the magnitude of what Marcus had set in motion. His signal mirror hadn't just called for help, it had summoned the largest gathering of pirate ships in maritime history. Through the spyglass she watched as small boats began lowering from the larger vessels, filled with figures preparing to come ashore. The operation was being conducted with military precision, suggesting that whatever Marcus had once been to these people, his call for assistance carried weight that transcended normal pirate politics. "We need to evacuate the village," Rodriguez said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "No settlement can withstand an assault by this many ships." But Elena continued watching through the spyglass, and what she saw contradicted Rodriguez's assumptions about pirate intentions. The approaching boats weren't arranged in battle formation. They were flying white flags alongside their usual colors, and the figures she could make out weren't brandishing weapons, but seemed to be dressed for ceremony rather than combat. "They're not coming to attack," she said with growing certainty. "Look at their formations, their flags. This isn't a raiding party, it's something else entirely." The golden spyglass revealed more details as the boats drew closer: musicians with instruments, people carrying what appeared to be gifts or tribute, and at the head of the formation, a woman in elaborate captain's attire, who stood in the bow of her boat like a queen approaching her coronation. Elena lowered the spyglass and looked around at her fellow villagers, seeing her own wonder reflected in their faces. Whatever was about to happen, it would be unlike anything anyone had ever witnessed. The simple act of helping a stranger had somehow summoned the most powerful pirate fleet in the world to their peaceful shore. As the first boats reached the beach, Elena realized that her life, and the life of everyone in Salmir, was about to change forever. The golden spyglass had shown her the magnitude of what approached, but no instrument could reveal the true consequences of the choice she had made to show mercy to a broken man. Artifact, the ceremonial cutlass, a jeweled sword representing Marcus's authority, brought ashore by Isabella as a symbol of his restored captaincy. The first boat to reach shore carried a woman unlike anyone the villagers of Salmir had ever seen. Isabella Santos stepped onto the beach with the confident grace of someone accustomed to commanding both respect and fear. Her long black hair was braided with silver threads. Her coat was cut from deep blue silk that had clearly cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, and at her side hung a cutlass whose jeweled hilt caught the morning sunlight like captured fire. But it was the second object she carried that made Elena's heart skip, an ornate wooden case that could only contain something of extraordinary significance. The case was carved from what appeared to be ebony, inlaid with mother-of-pearl designs that formed intricate nautical patterns, and secured with brass fittings that gleamed like gold. Behind Isabella, a dozen of her most trusted officers formed an honor guard, their weapons sheathed but their bearing suggesting they were prepared for any eventuality. These weren't the ragged cutthroats that populated most people's imagination of pirates. They moved with military discipline and wore uniforms that, while unconventional, spoke of pride and professionalism. Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt. "I am Lieutenant Rodriguez of the Provincial Guard. By what authority do you land on Spanish soil?" Isabella regarded him with the patient expression of someone accustomed to dealing with officials who vastly overestimated their own importance. "By the authority of the sea itself, Lieutenant, and by right of blood debt owed to one of your citizens." Her eyes scanned the gathered villagers until they found Elena, and when their gazes met, Isabella's stern expression softened into something approaching reverence. She approached with measured steps, her officers maintaining respectful distance. "You are Elena Vasquez," Isabella said. It wasn't a question. "I am." Elena's voice was steadier than she felt. "And you are?" "Captain Isabella Santos of the Crimson Brotherhood. I've come to honor a debt that can never truly be repaid." Isabella gestured toward the ornate case she carried. "You saved the life of our captain, Marcus Drake. More than that, you showed him mercy when he had forgotten such kindness existed." Elena glanced around at her neighbors, seeing their faces reflect her own confusion. I don't understand. Marcus left during the night. I haven't seen him since. He's here, Isabella interrupted gently. He's been watching from the cliffs above, making sure you were safe before revealing himself. Marcus, she called toward the rocky outcroppings that overlooked the beach. Your guardian angel awaits. A figure emerged from behind the rocks, Marcus Drake, but transformed from the broken man Elena had nursed back to health. He had somehow acquired proper clothing that fit his tall frame, his beard was neatly trimmed, and he carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Yet his eyes, when they found Elena's, held the same gratitude and warmth she remembered. As Marcus approached, Isabella opened the ornate case she carried. Inside, nested in red velvet, lay the most beautiful sword Elena had ever seen. The blade was polished to mirror brightness, but it was the hilt that truly captured attention, wrought from what appeared to be solid gold and encrusted with rubies, emeralds, and sapphires arranged in the pattern of the Brotherhood's octopus emblem. The ceremonial cutlass of the Crimson Brotherhood, Isabella announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Carried by our captains for over a century, passed down through leaders who have earned the loyalty of free men and women who choose to follow rather than being compelled to serve. She lifted the sword from its case and held it horizontally, offering it to Marcus with both hands. The gesture clearly carried deep significance, not just the return of a weapon, but the formal restoration of rank and authority. Marcus accepted the cutlass, his hands closing around the familiar hilt with obvious emotion. For a moment, Elena thought she saw tears in his eyes, though he blinked them away before anyone else could notice. 10 years ago, Marcus said, his voice carrying across the beach, this sword was taken from me because I had forgotten what it truly represented. I thought it symbolized the right to command through fear, to take what I wanted through violence, to live without regard for the consequences of my actions. He turned the blade so that it caught the sunlight, sending sparkles of light dancing across the sand. But this woman, he gestured toward Elena, showed me what the sword should represent, the power to protect rather than destroy, the authority to serve rather than exploit, the responsibility to use strength in defense of those who cannot defend themselves. Without warning, Marcus dropped to one knee before Elena, holding the ceremonial cutlass across his upturned palms in a gesture of complete submission. I offer you my sword and my service, Elena Vasquez. You saved more than my life. You saved my soul. From this day forward, the Crimson Brotherhood serves at your pleasure. The beach fell silent except for the sound of waves lapping against the shore. Elena stared down at the most feared pirate captain in the Caribbean kneeling before her, offering her command of the most powerful fleet on the seas, and realized that her simple act of kindness had created ripples that would change the world. Artifact, the treaty scroll, a formal agreement between the Crimson Brotherhood and the village, written on elegant parchment and sealed with Marcus's ring. Elena stared down at Marcus kneeling before her, the ceremonial cutlass gleaming in his outstretched hands, and felt the weight of a moment that would echo through history. Around them, 1,000 pirates had come ashore, but instead of the chaos and violence everyone expected, an almost reverent silence had fallen over the beach. Please stand up, Elena said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. I can't accept authority over people who should be free to choose their own path. Marcus rose slowly, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Then what would you have us do? We came here to honor a debt, to acknowledge that your kindness changed everything we thought we knew about strength and leadership. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been watching this unprecedented scene with growing bewilderment, finally found his voice. This is madness. You're all criminals, pirates, murderers, and thieves. Isabella turned to face the lieutenant with cold amusement. We are what the world has made us, Lieutenant, but this woman has shown us that we can choose to be something different. The tension on the beach was palpable as two entirely different worldviews confronted each other, the rigid authority of law and order represented by Rodriguez and the fluid honor code of the pirates represented by Isabella. Elena found herself standing between these opposing forces, her simple moral compass suddenly the deciding factor in a conflict that could reshape the entire coastline. There has to be a third option, Elena said, her mind racing as she tried to imagine a solution that honored everyone's dignity. What if instead of conquest or surrender, we created something new, an alliance based on mutual respect rather than fear? Marcus's eyes lit up with understanding. A treaty, a formal agreement that recognizes both the Brotherhood's autonomy and the village's sovereignty. Treaties are negotiated between equals, Rodriguez protested. These people are outlaws, they have no legal standing. Then perhaps, Isabella said with a dangerous smile, it's time for the law to evolve. We control these waters, Lieutenant. Every merchant ship that passes through pays tribute to the Brotherhood. We could make that tribute flow to Spanish authorities instead, in exchange for recognition and legitimacy. The implications were staggering. The Crimson Brotherhood controlled shipping lanes that generated enormous wealth that currently flowed to pirate treasuries but could instead fund provincial development, coastal defenses, and trade expansion. It would be the most profitable treaty in Spanish colonial history. Elena looked around at her fellow villagers, seeing hope beginning to replace fear on their faces. Thomas Blackwood, the village elder, stepped forward with the slow dignity of someone who had witnessed enough history to recognize a pivotal moment. What would such a treaty require of us? He asked. Marcus and Isabella exchanged glances, conducting an entire conversation in the subtle language of former partners who understood each other completely. Finally, Marcus nodded to Isabella, who produced an elegant leather portfolio from her coat. "We came prepared for this possibility," Isabella said, withdrawing sheets of fine parchment covered in careful script. A formal agreement that establishes Salmir as a protected port under Brotherhood guardianship, while maintaining Spanish sovereignty and law within the village proper. Elena examined the documents, amazed by their thoroughness and legal sophistication. The treaty established clear boundaries between pirate and civilian authority, created mechanisms for resolving disputes, and most importantly, protected both the village's traditional way of life and the Brotherhood's autonomy at sea. "This is remarkably detailed," she observed. "You wrote all this before coming ashore?" "We wrote it during the voyage," Marcus explained. Isabella insisted that if we were going to honor you properly, we needed to offer more than gratitude. We needed to offer genuine partnership. The treaty terms were generous to the point of seeming too good to be true. The Brotherhood would provide protection against other pirates, share a portion of their tribute collection with the village, and establish Salmir as a neutral port where legitimate merchants could trade safely. In exchange, the village would provide supplies and safe harbor for Brotherhood vessels, and Spanish authorities would recognize the pirates as legitimate guardians of maritime commerce. Rodriguez studied the documents with growing astonishment. These terms would make this village the wealthiest settlement on the coast within a year. "That's the idea," Isabella said. "Prosperity through partnership rather than exploitation." Elena watched as the various parties examined the treaty provisions, each discovering benefits they hadn't dared hope for. The pirates would gain legitimacy and reliable supply lines. The villagers would gain protection and unprecedented prosperity. The Spanish authorities would gain control over previously lawless waters and a substantial new source of revenue. Marcus approached Elena with his ring, the heavy gold signet she had first noticed on the unconscious stranger's finger. "Your approval seals this treaty," he said. "Without your blessing, none of this matters." Elena took the ring, feeling its familiar weight, and pressed it into the warm wax that had been prepared to seal the documents. As the octopus emblem left its mark on the parchment, she realized she was creating something that had never existed before, a bridge between the world of law and the world of freedom, built on the simple foundation of mutual respect. The Treaty of Salmir, as historians would later call it, became the model for maritime agreements throughout the Caribbean. But for Elena, it would always be remembered as the moment when choosing kindness created a future none of them could have imagined. Artifact, the Brotherhood flag, a massive crimson banner bearing the octopus sigil, raised above Elena's shack to mark it as sacred ground. In the days following the treaty signing, Salmir transformed into something unprecedented in maritime history, a village where pirates and civilians worked side by side, bound together by mutual respect rather than fear or conquest. The most visible symbol of this transformation was the massive flag that now flew above Elena's humble shack. The Brotherhood flag was a magnificent piece of craftsmanship, woven from the finest crimson silk and measuring 20 feet in length. The octopus emblem at its center had been embroidered with gold thread that caught the sunlight and seemed to make the creature writhe with living motion. 8 tentacles spread across the flag's surface, each one containing symbols that represented different aspects of the Brotherhood's code: courage, loyalty, justice, freedom, brotherhood, honor, protection, and redemption. Marcus had ordered the flag raised with great ceremony, explaining to the gathered villagers and pirates that Elena's shack was now considered sacred ground within the Brotherhood's tradition. No weapons could be drawn within sight of the flag, no harsh words spoken, no violence contemplated. It was a place of sanctuary where anyone could seek refuge, knowing they would be protected by the combined might of 1,000 pirate ships. Elena stood in her doorway, watching the morning activities that had become routine since the treaty was signed. Isabella Santos sat at a makeshift table under the flag, mediating a dispute between 2 of her captains over salvage rights to a recently discovered wreck. Her decisions were accepted without question, not because she commanded through fear, but because her wisdom and fairness had earned genuine respect. Nearby, village children played alongside young pirates who had come ashore to help with construction projects. Elena marveled at how quickly the barriers between their worlds had dissolved once people began seeing each other as individuals rather than categories. The pirate youth taught the village children advanced knots and navigation techniques, while the villagers shared knowledge of farming, fishing, and coastal survival. "It's remarkable, isn't it?" Marcus said, joining Elena in her doorway. "A month ago, I thought redemption was something I could only seek in isolation. Now I see it's something that can only be achieved through community." Elena nodded, her attention drawn to a group of Brotherhood carpenters who were reinforcing her shack's foundation. Without being asked, they had decided that the building flying their sacred flag deserved to be as permanent and sturdy as the principles it represented. The simple wooden structure was being transformed into something that could withstand hurricanes and time itself. "I never imagined that helping one person could lead to all this," Elena admitted. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it must be a dream." "If it's a dream," Marcus replied, "then it's one worth staying asleep for. But I think what we've created here is more real than most of the world wants to admit. People hunger for purpose beyond mere survival, for belonging that transcends artificial boundaries." Under the flag's protection, Elena had become something she never expected, a diplomat and mediator whose opinion carried weight in decisions affecting thousands of people. Pirates sought her counsel on matters of honor and justice, while villagers brought her their concerns about the rapid changes in their community. Her simple moral compass had become the North Star, guiding an entirely new form of civilization. The flag itself had begun attracting pilgrims, merchants, soldiers, even other pirates who had heard stories of the miraculous alliance forged at Salmir. They came seeking to understand how enemies had become allies, how outlaws had become protectors, how a single act of kindness had reshaped the balance of power across the entire Caribbean. Thomas Blackwood, the village elder, had established a tradition of gathering under the flag each evening to share stories and make collective decisions about the community's future. These meetings had evolved into something resembling a parliament where pirates and civilians had equal voices in shaping their shared destiny. "The flag means different things to different people," Isabella observed, approaching from her table where she had just resolved another dispute. "To the Brotherhood, it represents our evolution from chaos to order. To your villagers, it symbolizes protection and prosperity. But to you, Elena, what does it represent?" Elena studied the magnificent banner rippling in the ocean breeze, its golden embroidery catching the late afternoon light. The flag flew above her humble home like a guardian spirit, transforming her small corner of the world into a beacon that could be seen from ships miles offshore. "Hope," she said finally. "It represents the possibility that people can change, that enemies can become friends, that small acts of kindness can have enormous consequences. Most of all, it represents proof that love is stronger than fear." As evening approached, the flag would be illuminated by lanterns that ensured it remained visible throughout the night, a constant reminder that somewhere in the world, pirates and civilians lived in harmony, that mercy had triumphed over vengeance, and that a poor woman's compassion had created something magnificent. The Brotherhood flag had become more than a symbol. It was a promise that the alliance forged beneath it would endure whatever storms might come. And as word of its meaning spread across the seas, it began attracting others who sought to build their own communities on foundations of honor rather than fear. Artifact: the mutineer's blade, a rusty knife wielded by those who resist Marcus's new direction, representing the old ways of violence and greed. Not everyone in the Brotherhood embraced the transformation that Elena's influence had brought to their ranks. 3 weeks after the Treaty of Salmir was signed, the first serious challenge to Marcus's new leadership emerged from an unexpected source: Captain Thomas Blackheart Morrison, who commanded one of the most feared ships in the fleet. Morrison had been Marcus's rival for years before the exile, a man who believed that pirates should take what they wanted through force and show mercy only when it served their immediate interests. He had reluctantly accepted Isabella's leadership during Marcus's absence, but the restoration of his former captain, especially a Marcus who preached cooperation with civilians, proved more than his pride could tolerate. The confrontation began at dawn when Morrison's ship, the Blood Sovereign, sailed close to shore and fired a single cannon shot, not at any target, but into the empty sky as a formal challenge. By pirate tradition, this was a demand for single combat between captains, a way of settling disputes that had governed Brotherhood politics for generations. Elena watched from beneath the great flag as Marcus emerged from the village to face Morrison on the beach. The rusty cutlass in Morrison's hand told its own story. This wasn't the ceremonial weapon of leadership, but a working blade notched and stained from countless battles. Morrison had chosen it deliberately, rejecting the elegant weapons that symbolized refined leadership in favor of something that represented raw, brutal power. 10 years in exile made you soft, Drake, Morrison called across the sand, his voice carrying to every pirate and villager who had gathered to witness the confrontation. You've forgotten what it means to be free. Now you bow to civilians and beg scraps from Spanish officials like a tame dog. Marcus stood calm and centered, the ceremonial cutlass at his side gleaming with jeweled beauty that contrasted sharply with Morrison's crude weapon. Freedom without honor is just another form of slavery, Thomas. I learned that during my years away from this life. Morrison laughed harshly, raising his blade in a gesture that revealed its sorry condition. The steel was pitted with rust, the edge chipped from careless use, and the handle wrapped with dirty leather that had clearly seen better days. It was a weapon that reflected its owner's philosophy, functional but ugly, effective but devoid of elegance or respect for craft. Honor, Morrison spat. Honor doesn't fill a man's belly or put gold in his pocket. Honor doesn't give you the power to take what you want from a world that would see you hang for existing. Around them, the Brotherhood had divided into clear factions. Isabella's supporters stood behind Marcus, recognizing that his transformation represented evolution rather than weakness. But Morrison commanded loyalty from those who had joined the pirate life specifically to escape society's rules, who saw any cooperation with authorities as betrayal of their fundamental freedom. You want to know what I think of your new alliance? Morrison continued, turning his rusty blade toward Elena. I think it makes us all weak. I think it makes us forget who we really are. The threat to Elena was unmistakable, and its effect on Marcus was immediate and dramatic. The calm composure he had maintained throughout the confrontation vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. Elena realized that while Marcus had indeed changed, the protective instincts that had once made him feared throughout the Caribbean remained very much alive. "Your quarrel is with me, Thomas," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a tone that made several pirates step backward. "Leave her out of this." Morrison grinned, recognizing that he had found Marcus's weakness. The great Shadowbane, brought low by a woman who couldn't defend herself against a child with a slingshot. How the mighty have fallen. The duel that followed was brief but definitive. Morrison's rusty blade was no match for Marcus's skill and superior weapon, but more importantly, it represented a philosophy that had already been proven inferior. The old ways of pure aggression and selfish brutality could not stand against the disciplined strength that came from fighting for something greater than personal gain. When Morrison fell, his rusty cutlass skittered across the sand to land at Elena's feet. She picked up the crude weapon, studying its damaged condition with the same care she had once applied to Marcus's infected wounds. "This blade tells a story," she said to the assembled crowd. "It's been neglected, abused, used only for violence without thought for maintenance or improvement. It represents a way of life that destroys even the tools it depends upon." Elena held Morrison's weapon beside Marcus's ceremonial cutlass, the contrast making her point more effectively than any speech. One blade is beautiful because it's been cared for, honored, maintained by someone who understood its value. The other is ugly because it's been treated as nothing more than an instrument of immediate gratification. The message was clear to everyone present. The old ways represented by Morrison's rusty blade led inevitably to degradation and failure, while the new path, symbolized by Marcus's jeweled cutlass, offered the possibility of lasting beauty and genuine strength. Artifact: the captain's log, Marcus's personal record book, documenting his transformation and new code of conduct for the Brotherhood. 2 days after Morrison's defeat, Marcus faced a test that would prove whether his transformation was genuine or merely convenient rhetoric. A messenger ship arrived bearing news that would challenge everything the Brotherhood claimed to have become. The port town of San Rafael, 50 miles down the coast, was under siege by Captain Rodrigo the Butcher Vasquez and his fleet of cutthroats. Marcus stood in his cabin aboard the Crimson Vengeance, updating the leather-bound logbook that had become his most treasured possession. Unlike the journal Elena had discovered, which chronicled his past misdeeds and growing remorse, this new log documented his attempts to lead according to the principles she had taught him. "Day 23 of the new Brotherhood," he wrote in careful script. "Morrison's challenge has been answered, but the real test begins now. Vasquez attacks civilians for sport, not profit. Our response will define whether we are truly protectors or merely pirates with prettier words." Isabella entered without knocking, a privilege she had earned through years of loyal service and wise counsel. Her face was grim as she spread charts across Marcus's desk, showing the tactical situation at San Rafael. "Vasquez has 12 ships," she reported. "He's blockading the harbor and landing parties are burning the merchant quarter. By all reports, he's not interested in treasure. He's killing for the pleasure of it." Marcus set down his pen and studied the charts. The old Marcus would have seen opportunity in Vasquez's attack, a chance to move in after the butchery was complete and claim whatever riches remained. But Elena's influence had taught him to see suffering where once he had seen only strategic advantage. "How many civilians?" he asked. "Perhaps 3,000, mostly fishermen and their families, but also merchants and craftsmen. They've sent word to the provincial guard, but help won't arrive for days." Marcus picked up his log again, writing as he spoke. "The Brotherhood has sworn to protect the innocent. San Rafael may not be under our formal protection, but they are defenseless people facing a madman. We have both the power and the duty to intervene." Isabella nodded approvingly. "I hoped you'd see it that way. But Marcus, this won't be like our usual operations. Vasquez doesn't follow any code of honor. He tortures prisoners, murders civilians, and has been known to sink ships full of survivors just for entertainment." Opening his log to a page he had prepared weeks earlier, Marcus showed Isabella the new code of conduct he had been developing. Written in the same careful script that filled the rest of the book, It established rules of engagement that would have seemed impossible under his old leadership. Rule 1. The Brotherhood protects those who cannot protect themselves. Rule 2. We fight only when necessary and show mercy to those who surrender. Rule 3. No civilian shall be harmed in our operations unless they directly threaten Brotherhood members. Isabella read the additional rules with growing amazement. They covered treatment of prisoners, distribution of captured supplies to local populations, and protocols for minimizing damage during combat operations. It was a complete reimagining of pirate warfare, transforming raiders into guardians. These rules will make us less effective in battle, she observed. Vasquez won't hesitate to use dirty tactics. Marcus closed the log and tucked it into his coat. Then we'll have to be better than him through skill rather than brutality. Elena showed me that true strength comes from protecting others, not from causing fear. The Brotherhood fleet that sailed toward San Rafael represented the largest coordinated rescue operation in pirate history. 47 ships moved in formation, their crews having volunteered for a mission that offered no treasure, no personal gain, only the opportunity to save strangers from senseless violence. Marcus documented every detail of the operation in his log, understanding that future Brotherhood leaders would need guidance for similar situations. His writing had evolved from the self-serving justifications of his exile journal to the careful observations of someone creating a new tradition. Hour 12 of the approach to San Rafael, he wrote as they neared the besieged port. The crew understands that today we fight not for gold or glory, but to prove that pirates can be heroes. Elena's lesson has become our greatest weapon, the knowledge that mercy makes us stronger, not weaker. The battle plan Marcus developed reflected his transformation completely. Instead of the overwhelming assault that would have been his old approach, he designed a precise operation that prioritized civilian safety over tactical advantage. Brotherhood ships would create corridors for refugee evacuation while elite crews moved inland to neutralize Vasquez's forces with minimal collateral damage. As they approached the smoke-filled horizon where San Rafael burned, Marcus made his final log entry before battle. Whatever happens today, we fight as Elena taught us, with strength tempered by compassion, with courage guided by conscience. The brotherhood that emerges from this day will be worthy of the trust she placed in us. The captain's log had become more than a record of events. It was the foundation document of a new kind of piracy, one that measured success not by treasure taken but by lives saved. Artifact, the peace pipe, a ceremonial smoking pipe carved from whalebone, used to formalize alliances between former enemies. News of the Brotherhood's heroic defense of San Rafael spread faster than wildfire across the Caribbean. Within weeks, delegations began arriving at Salmia, not to demand the pirates' surrender, but to seek alliances with the most unusual naval force in maritime history. Elena found herself thrust into a role she had never imagined: diplomat to admirals, negotiator between worlds that had been at war for centuries. The most challenging negotiation involved Admiral Diego Mendoza, commander of the Spanish Caribbean fleet, who had spent 15 years hunting Marcus Drake and now found himself sitting across a table from his former quarry. The meeting took place under the Brotherhood flag in a pavilion constructed specifically for these delicate discussions. Elena watched the two men eye each other like old wolves forced to share the same territory. Mendoza's uniform was immaculate, every button polished, every crease precise, the embodiment of military discipline and imperial authority. Marcus wore his finest coat, but it remained distinctly pirate in cut and decoration, a reminder that some transformations were internal rather than cosmetic. "This is unprecedented," Mendoza said stiffly. "The Crown does not negotiate with criminals." "Then perhaps," Elena suggested gently, "we should focus on what the Crown might gain from an alliance with reformed protectors of maritime commerce." From a carved wooden case, Elena withdrew an object that had been gifted to her by a grateful tribal chief whose village the Brotherhood had saved from slavers. The peace pipe was a work of art, carved from whalebone and inlaid with silver designs that told stories of ancient alliances between peoples who had once been enemies. The pipe was nearly 2 feet long, its bowl carved in the shape of a diving whale, its stem decorated with intricate patterns that represented the 4 winds and the unity they could bring when properly directed. According to the chief who had presented it, the pipe had been used for 3 centuries to seal agreements between rival tribes, its smoke carrying prayers for lasting peace across whatever divisions had previously existed. In the islands, Elena explained, offering the pipe to Mendoza, this is used when former enemies choose to become allies. The smoke represents the transformation of bitter thoughts into shared hopes for the future. Mendoza examined the pipe with the appreciation of someone who understood fine craftsmanship. You're asking me to participate in a pagan ritual? I'm asking you to participate in a ceremony of mutual respect, Elena corrected. The pipe doesn't change your faith. It demonstrates your commitment to finding peaceful solutions to complex problems. Marcus leaned forward, his voice carrying none of the arrogance that had once characterized his negotiations. Admiral, you've spent 15 years trying to capture or kill me. How many ships have been lost? How many good men have died? How much treasure has been spent on a war that benefits no one? You're responsible for those deaths, Mendoza replied sharply. Your choice to live outside the law created this conflict. You're right, Marcus acknowledged, surprising the Admiral with his directness. But I'm offering you the chance to end it with honor, rather than continuing a war that serves no one's interests. Elena filled the peace pipe with a special mixture of tobacco and healing herbs, lighting it with steady hands despite the tension in the pavilion. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, creating a column that seemed to connect earth and sky. Admiral Mendoza, she said, offering him the pipe, your ships could patrol these waters without fear of Brotherhood interference. Our ships could escort Spanish treasure fleets and merchant vessels, providing protection that your navy alone cannot match. Pirates like Vasquez would find themselves outnumbered and outgunned wherever they tried to operate. Mendoza accepted the pipe, studying the carved whale that formed its bowl. And in return, recognition of the Brotherhood's legitimate authority over maritime security, Marcus replied. A percentage of the tribute we collect from merchant shipping, with the rest flowing to Spanish treasuries, and most importantly, an end to the cycle of violence that has made these waters unsafe for everyone. The Admiral drew smoke from the pipe, holding it for a long moment before releasing it in a cloud that mingled with the incense burning in the pavilion. When he passed the pipe to Marcus, Elena knew that something fundamental had shifted in the relationship between these 2 proud men. The Crown's position, Mendoza said carefully, is that former criminals can earn redemption through service to legitimate authority. Marcus accepted the pipe and drew deeply before responding. The Brotherhood's position is that legitimate authority must be earned through service to justice rather than claimed through force alone. Elena took the pipe last, adding her own breath to the smoke that rose between them. Then perhaps we can create something new, authority that serves justice, power that protects rather than exploits, strength that builds rather than destroys. As the smoke from the peace pipe drifted out over the harbor where Spanish warships and pirate vessels lay anchored side by side, Elena realized she was witnessing the birth of a new kind of civilization, one built not on conquest or submission, but on the revolutionary idea that former enemies could become partners in creating a better world. Artifact, the Code of Honor, a beautifully illuminated manuscript establishing new rules for the Brotherhood, based on principles of justice and protection. In the months following the peace negotiations, Elena and Marcus worked together on a project that would become the foundation of everything the Brotherhood aspired to be. In a quiet corner of Elena's reinforced shack, beneath the crimson flag that marked their sanctuary, they labored over a document that would transform pirate law forever. The manuscript they created was a work of art as much as legislation. Elena had commissioned the finest scribes from the regional capital to inscribe their words on pages of vellum so pure it seemed to glow in candlelight. Each page was illuminated with intricate designs that told the story of the Brotherhood's transformation. Octopi, whose tentacles formed protective circles around ships and coastal villages, storms that gave way to calm seas, and figures that evolved from shadowy raiders into noble guardians. Article 1. Elena read aloud as Marcus reviewed their latest draft. The Brotherhood exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves, to ensure safe passage for honest merchants, and to maintain order on seas that have known only chaos. The language was deliberately formal, crafted to carry weight in any court or council where the document might be examined. But beneath the legal precision lay principles that Elena had drawn from her mother's teachings about compassion, Marcus's hard-won understanding of honor, and Isabella's practical wisdom about leadership. Marcus studied the illuminated border that surrounded Article 1, where gold leaf caught the lamplight and made the octopus emblems seem to move like living creatures. "It's beautiful work," he said, "but beauty won't make these rules easier to follow when faced with difficult choices." "That's exactly why it needs to be beautiful," Elena replied. "People need to be inspired by the ideals they're asked to live up to. If we just give them a list of rules, they'll follow them grudgingly. If we give them something magnificent, they'll want to prove themselves worthy of it." The code of honor they were creating contained 47 articles, each addressing specific situations that Brotherhood members might encounter. Unlike the crude codes that had governed previous pirate alliances, usually simple agreements about dividing plunder and settling disputes through violence, this document established a complete framework for ethical leadership. Article 12 addressed the treatment of prisoners. No captive shall be harmed after surrender, no prisoner tortured for information or pleasure, and all captured enemies shall be given opportunity to join the Brotherhood or accept honorable exile. Article 23 covered interactions with civilian populations in all ports and settlements. Brotherhood members shall conduct themselves as guests rather than conquerors, paying fair prices for goods and services, respecting local customs, and offering protection without demanding submission. Elena's favorite was Article 31, which dealt with the education of new recruits. Every member of the Brotherhood shall teach their skills to others, ensuring that knowledge serves the many rather than the few, and that wisdom gained through experience becomes heritage shared across generations. Marcus had insisted on Article 38, which established protocols for dealing with corrupt officials. Where legal authority serves injustice rather than justice, the Brotherhood may act independently, but always with restraint proportional to the threat faced, and always with accountability to those we claim to protect. The most controversial article had been 39, which addressed the question of treasure and wealth. Riches taken from the enemies of justice shall be shared according to need and merit, with portions always set aside for the relief of suffering and the support of communities under our protection. As they worked through the final articles, Elena realized they were creating more than a code of conduct. They were designing the constitution of a new kind of society, one that combined the freedom of the seas with the stability of just law. "The illuminations tell our story," she observed, watching Marcus add decorative elements to the margins. "Someone reading this centuries from now will understand not just what we decided, but why we decided it." The manuscript's most striking page contained the oath that every Brotherhood member would swear upon joining, by sea and sky, by storm and calm. "I pledge my strength to those who need protection, my loyalty to those who deserve trust, and my life to the cause of justice upon waters that have known too much injustice." Marcus set down his pen and studied the completed oath, its words surrounded by illuminations that showed the transformation from chaos to order, from fear to hope. "Elena, do you realize what we've done? We've created something that could change the entire world." Elena nodded, running her fingers across the vellum pages that contained their shared vision. "We've proved that people can choose to be better than their circumstances, that honor can be stronger than greed, and that even pirates can become heroes if someone believes in their capacity for goodness." The code of honor would be copied and distributed to every ship in the Brotherhood fleet, but the original manuscript would remain in Elena's keeping. A reminder that the most profound changes often begin in the humblest places, with ordinary people choosing to do extraordinary things. Artifact, the memorial stone, a carved monument erected on the shore where Marcus first washed up, commemorating the moment that changed everything 1 year after the great storm that brought Marcus Drake to Salmere's shore. The village dedicated a monument that would ensure the story of Elena's compassion would never be forgotten. The memorial stone stood 8 feet tall, carved from granite that had been quarried in the distant mountains and transported to the coast at enormous expense. A gift from the Spanish crown in recognition of the peace that Elena's kindness had made possible. The stone's surface bore inscriptions in 3 languages, Spanish for the local population, English for the international merchants who now frequented the port, and Latin for the scholars who had already begun studying the unprecedented alliance between pirates and authorities. But the most moving element was the relief carving that covered the monument's front face, a scene depicting Elena pulling an unconscious man from the storm-racked shore. Master sculptor Antonio Vasquez had spent 6 months perfecting the image, working from descriptions provided by villagers who had witnessed the rescue. Elena's face showed determination mixed with compassion as she struggled to save a stranger whose identity she couldn't have known. Marcus lay unconscious at her feet, his form broken but somehow dignified even in defeat. Around them, storm waves crashed against rocks that had been carved with such skill they seemed to move in the changing light. Here, read the primary inscription. Mercy triumphed over fear, and one woman's courage changed the world. Elena stood before the completed monument, overwhelmed by the realization that her simple act of helping an injured stranger had become a symbol of hope for people she would never meet. Ships from across the Caribbean made special voyages to Salmere just so their crews could see the memorial stone and hear the full story from villagers who had witnessed the transformation. "It's too much," she said to Marcus, who stood beside her studying the carved image of his own rescue. "I was just doing what anyone should do. I don't deserve to be remembered as some kind of saint." Marcus smiled, his weathered face showing the peace that had replaced the torment she remembered from his fevered ravings. "That's exactly why you deserve to be remembered. Saints don't think they're saints. They just do what needs to be done." The memorial had become a pilgrimage destination for those seeking examples of how ordinary people could make extraordinary differences. Mothers brought their children to learn about compassion. Merchants paused in their journeys to reflect on the power of mercy. Even hardened sailors, skeptical of everything except wind and tide, found themselves moved by the simple story carved into stone. Isabella Santos approached from the harbor, carrying official documents that bore the seals of a dozen different governments. The Brotherhood's transformation had inspired similar experiments throughout the Caribbean, with former enemies negotiating alliances based on the Salmere model. The governor of Jamaica requests Brotherhood protection for their merchant convoys, Isabella reported. The Dutch authorities in Curaçao want to establish a formal treaty similar to ours, and the French have actually invited us to establish a permanent base in Martinique. Elena shook her head in wonder. "A year ago, I was a poor woman living alone in a shack. Now kings and governors seek my opinion on matters of state. How did this happen?" "It happened because you chose compassion when fear would have been easier," Marcus replied. "Because you saw a human being where others saw only a threat. Because you proved that love is stronger than hatred if someone is brave enough to act on it." The memorial stone had been positioned precisely on the spot where Elena first found Marcus, marking the exact coordinates where mercy had changed the course of history. Visitors often brought flowers or small offerings, leaving them at the base of the monument as prayers for their own opportunities to show kindness to strangers. Thomas Blackwood, now serving as Salmere's official historian, had begun collecting stories from people whose lives had been touched by the Brotherhood's new mission. Former enemies who had become allies, refugees who had found safety, children who had been rescued from slavers, all testified to the ripple effects of Elena's choice to help a broken man on a storm-ravaged beach. "The memorial tells only part of our story," Thomas observed, consulting the leather journal where he recorded these testimonies. "The real monument is what we've become, a community where former enemies work together, where strength serves justice, where the powerful protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. As evening approached, lanterns were lit around the memorial stone, ensuring it remained visible to ships passing in the night. The light served as both navigation aid and symbol, a beacon reminding travelers that even in the darkest storms, someone might be waiting on the shore with help, with hope, with the kind of love that transforms both giver and receiver. Elena touched the carved stone that bore her image, feeling the smooth granite that would endure long after she was gone. The monument would preserve this moment forever, but she understood that the true legacy lay not in stone, but in the countless acts of compassion it would inspire in generations yet unborn. Artifact: the golden anchor, a massive treasure gifted to Elena by the Brotherhood, which she transforms into a foundation for helping other outcasts find redemption. 10 years had passed since the storm that brought Marcus Drake to Salmir's shore, and Elena Vasquez had become a legend whose influence stretched far beyond the small coastal village where her story began. The golden anchor that dominated her transformed home served as both monument to the Brotherhood's gratitude and symbol of how great treasures could serve purposes greater than their creators ever imagined. The anchor was magnificent, 12 feet tall and cast from solid gold that gleamed like captured sunlight. Its surface bore intricate engravings telling the story of the Brotherhood's transformation, with scenes of battle giving way to images of rescue and protection. The anchor's weight was enormous, requiring a specially reinforced foundation, but its true significance lay in what Elena had chosen to do with its value. Rather than keeping the treasure for herself, Elena had used the anchor as collateral to establish the most ambitious charitable network in Caribbean history. The foundation of the Golden Anchor operated schools in 12 ports, hospitals in 8 cities, and orphanages in countless coastal communities. Former pirates served as teachers and protectors, their skills redirected toward nurturing rather than destroying. Elena, now 53 and bearing the dignified lines that came from a decade of extraordinary responsibility, stood in her expanded home reviewing correspondence from Foundation operations across the region. Letters arrived daily from communities requesting help, from grateful families whose children had been rescued from slavery, and from former enemies who had found redemption through service to others. The orphanage in Port Royal needs additional funding, reported Sister Catherine, a former pirate who had chosen religious life as her path to redemption. We have 37 children now, mostly rescued from situations that would have destroyed them without intervention. Marcus entered carrying his own stack of reports. At 62, he had aged into the role of elder statesman with grace and wisdom that his younger self could never have imagined. The ceremonial cutlass still hung at his side, but it had become purely symbolic. His real power now lay in his ability to inspire others toward nobility. The Dutch settlement at New Amsterdam wants to establish their own foundation branch, he announced. They've seen what we've accomplished here and believe they can adapt our model to their circumstances. Elena studied the golden anchor that dominated her main room, its surface reflecting the afternoon light streaming through windows that had been expanded to accommodate her new role as coordinator of humanitarian efforts throughout the Caribbean. The anchor had become far more valuable as a symbol than it had ever been as mere treasure. "Do you remember what you said when the Brotherhood first presented this to me?" Elena asked Marcus. "You said it represented treasure that came from choosing mercy over conquest." "I remember, but I don't think either of us understood how literally that would prove true. The anchor's gold has generated more wealth through charitable investments than any pirate raid in history." A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Elena opened it to find a young woman she didn't recognize, travel-worn, obviously exhausted, carrying a bundle that suggested she had been walking for days. "Are you Elena Vasquez?" the woman asked hesitantly. "I've come seeking help. My name is Maria Santos, and I have nowhere else to turn." Elena's heart stirred with familiar emotion. 10 years after helping Marcus, she still felt the same impulse to aid strangers in need, regardless of their circumstances or background. The woman's desperation was evident, but so was her courage in seeking help from someone she knew only through stories. "Come in," Elena said warmly. stepping aside to welcome another person whose life might be transformed by unexpected kindness. "Tell me what you need." As Maria Santos entered the home that had been built around the golden anchor, Elena noticed something that made her breath catch. The young woman bore a striking resemblance to Isabella Santos, the same proud bearing, the same intelligent eyes, the same aura of strength tempered by vulnerability. "Isabella Santos is my aunt," Maria confirmed when Elena commented on the resemblance. "She sent me here when circumstances in my life became complicated. She said you might understand what it means to need a second chance." Elena smiled, remembering how the world had seemed impossibly large when she first helped Marcus, and how it now felt interconnected in ways that suggested some guiding pattern beyond coincidence. The niece of the woman who had helped restore Marcus to his crew was now seeking the same kind of assistance that Elena had offered a decade earlier. "Your aunt is wise," Elena replied. "Everyone deserves the opportunity to start over, to become better than their circumstances suggest they can be." As Maria Santos settled into the chair beside the golden anchor, Elena realized that her story was far from over. The legend that had grown around her first act of mercy would continue expanding, not because people remembered what she had done, but because they were inspired to do similar things themselves. Marcus approached with tea and bread, his movements showing the same careful attention to hospitality that Elena had shown him during his recovery. The cycle of compassion that had begun with one woman's choice to help a stranger was perpetuating itself, creating ripples that would continue spreading long after any of them were gone. The golden anchor caught the evening light, its engravings seeming to move like living scenes in the shifting illumination. But Elena's attention was focused on the young woman who had just entered her life, another opportunity to prove that mercy was stronger than fear, that love could triumph over desperation, and that ordinary people possessed the power to change the world through simple acts of extraordinary courage. Outside, ships flying both Spanish colors and Brotherhood flags moved peacefully through waters that had once known only violence and fear. The transformation that had begun in Elena's humble shack had spread across the entire Caribbean, proof that a single choice to show compassion could reshape civilization itself. The golden anchor would ensure that legacy endured, but the true treasure lay in the knowledge that somewhere someone else was choosing kindness over fear, and the legend would continue growing.